Jack Larson wiped the oil from his rough, worn hands, the sharp scent of engine grease clinging to him like a memory he couldn't shake. The dingy clock on the wall of Hal's auto repair ticked past 6, signaling the end of another grueling day. He sighed, tossing the rag into a nearby bin without much thought. "Heading out, Jack?" Hal's gravelly voice echoed from under a rusted Ford. "Yeah." "See you tomorrow," Jack replied, his voice just as tired as the tools strewn around the shop. The cool autumn air nipped at his face as he stepped outside, the setting sun casting a deep orange glow across the sky. It was a sight that once might have stirred something in him, but now it only reminded him of days slipping away and dreams that had long since faded. His boots crunched on the gravel as he made his way to his truck, an old, rusted '84 Ford that had seen better years. He climbed in, the familiar creak of the door sounding like the soundtrack to his life. The engine sputtered to life, and Jack pulled out onto Main Street, watching as the sleepy town of Oak Ridge, Iowa, blurred past. Faded storefronts and fast food chains blended into the background. At home, Jack heated up a frozen dinner and settled into his worn recliner. The TV droned on about some celebrity scandal he couldn't be bothered to care about. He glanced at the empty space on the mantel where a photo of Lisa used to sit, a pang of loneliness twisting in his gut. Another thrilling night in paradise, he thought bitterly, taking a sip from his lukewarm beer. Restless, he stepped onto his back porch, the old boards creaking beneath his weight. The night sky stretched out before him, a vast expanse of stars that made him feel small, insignificant. That's when he saw it, a flash of light, too fast and too bright to be a plane. A streak of blue-green fire trailed across the sky. Jack blinked, sure he was imagining things, but the lights came again, twisting and swirling like cosmic fireworks. For the first time in years, his heart raced. "What the hell?" he whispered, eyes wide in disbelief. Then, just as suddenly as they appeared, the lights vanished, leaving the night sky as dark and quiet as before. Jack stood there, his pulse pounding in his ears. Had he imagined it? Was he finally losing it after years of monotony? Sleep was impossible that night, his mind replaying the strange lights on an endless loop. The next morning, Jack felt like he hadn't slept at all. After chugging down several cups of coffee, he stepped outside, travel mug in hand, and froze. Sitting casually on his front steps was the most striking woman he had ever seen, and she was blue. Not a pale or sickly blue, but a deep, vibrant shade that shimmered in the morning light. Jack blinked, certain his eyes were playing tricks on him, but she didn't disappear. She stared at him with a mix of curiosity and, was that hope? "Good morning, Jack Larson," she said, her voice melodic, carrying an unusual accent. "My name is Kyla. I have traveled far to find you." Jack's mug slipped from his hand, coffee splattering across the porch, but he barely noticed. "Oh, what? How do you know my name?" he stammered, his mind reeling. Kyla stood, her movements graceful and fluid. She was tall, easily over 6 feet, and her toned figure was accentuated by the strange, shimmering clothing she wore, which looked like a bikini but seemed to pulse with a faint glow. Her face was stunningly alien, with high cheekbones, large almond-shaped eyes that shifted colors like opals, and full lips that curved into a tentative smile. "I have been watching your planet for some time," she explained, stepping toward him. Jack instinctively backed up until he was against the door. "You were chosen." "Chosen? For what?" Jack's voice cracked. "Is this some kind of prank? Did Hal put you up to this?" Kyla's brow furrowed in confusion. "I do not know this Hal, and this is no joke. I need your help, Jack Larson. My future depends on it." Jack's mind raced. This had to be a dream, or a hallucination brought on by too much late-night TV and microwave dinners, but everything felt real. The crisp morning air, the scent of coffee, the sound of the porch creaking under Kyla's feet as she approached. "Look, Kyla, or whatever your name is, I don't know what you're playing at, but I'm not interested. I've got to get to work and—" "Please," she interrupted, her voice laced with desperation. "I know this is confusing, but I beg you to hear me out. I've escaped my world, seeking freedom from a life I did not choose. But to stay here, I must take a human mate." Jack's jaw dropped. "A mate? You mean marriage? I don't even know you. And you're blue." Kyla's eyes darkened, almost as if she was hurt. "Is my appearance offensive to you? I was told humans valued diversity." No, it's not that, Jack stammered, running a hand through his thinning hair. This is just insane. You're an alien, and you're asking me to marry you? Do you realize how crazy that sounds? I understand your hesitation, Kyla said softly, but I am sincere. Before Jack could respond, she raised her hand. The air around it shimmered, and suddenly a glowing orb of energy appeared, pulsing with the same ethereal light Jack had seen in the sky the night before. Jack's knees buckled, and he slid down the door, landing hard. You're really an alien. Yes, Kyla confirmed, letting the orb dissipate. She knelt beside him, close enough for Jack to see silver flecks in her ever-shifting eyes. I know this is difficult to believe, but I need your help. My people have strict rules, and I was destined to be little more than a servant. I fled to escape that fate. Despite his shock, Jack felt a strange sympathy. He knew what it felt like to be trapped, to watch your life pass by in frustration. But why him? Why me? He asked, voice hoarse. Of all people, why choose some washed-up mechanic in the middle of nowhere? Kyla smiled gently. You underestimate yourself, Jack Larson. I chose you because I sensed a kindred spirit, someone who has felt loss and disappointment, but who still has a spark of life inside. Someone who might understand what it's like to want more than the hand you've been dealt. Her words hit Jack hard. He'd spent so long convincing himself he was fine with the life he had, but hearing this strange, beautiful alien lay out the truth made something stir deep inside. This is a lot to take in, Jack finally said, standing up. Kyla rose too, keeping a respectful distance. I can't just jump into marriage, especially not with an alien. I don't expect an immediate answer, Kyla said softly, her eyes full of hope. But please, consider my request. I have no other options. My people will come for me if I don't find a mate. Jack hesitated. Are you in danger? Not right away, she said, but the longer I remain unattached, the more likely they'll find me. A union with a human would protect me under interstellar law. Jack's head spun. Aliens. Interstellar law? It was like something from a movie, but he couldn't deny how alive he felt after years of numbness. I need time to think, he said, his voice unsure. Kyla nodded, though her eyes dimmed slightly with disappointment. Perhaps I could stay here for a short time? Just until we figure things out. Jack knew it was a crazy idea, but something in her pleading gaze made the decision for him. All right, he sighed. You can stay. Just for a few days. But no more of that glowing stuff. The last thing I need is the neighbors thinking I'm running a freak show. Jack stood there for a moment, trying to wrap his head around the surreal situation. An alien woman, with shimmering blue skin and opal-like eyes, was asking him to marry her. It felt like a bad dream, or a strange sci-fi movie he'd stumbled upon late at night, but there was no waking up from this. He glanced at Kyla, who was now watching him with that same look of hopeful anticipation. He had no idea what he'd just agreed to, but his gut told him to see it through. So, do you, eat? Jack asked awkwardly, scratching the back of his neck. He felt ridiculous, but he didn't know how to interact with an extraterrestrial. Kyla tilted her head, her opalescent eyes flashing silver. Yes, I require sustenance, though it is likely different from what you consume. Right. Okay, well, come inside, I guess, Jack said, stepping aside to let her into his modest house. The thought crossed his mind that this was completely insane, letting a stranger, an alien no less, into his home, but he was past the point of second-guessing. Kyla entered with a kind of graceful curiosity, her eyes scanning the small living room, the cluttered coffee table, and the worn recliner. She looked out of place in his simple world, like some radiant figure from a painting dropped into a dusty old photograph. Jack caught himself staring at her and quickly looked away, embarrassed. Please, make yourself comfortable, Jack said, gesturing toward the couch. I don't really have much to offer in terms of alien hospitality, but, there's water in the fridge. Beer, too, if that's your thing. Kyla gave a soft smile, her eyes shimmering a little brighter. Water will suffice. Thank you. She sat down carefully, her posture impossibly perfect, even in his lumpy old couch. Jack grabbed a glass of water from the kitchen, trying to calm his nerves. He could feel his heart still racing from the morning's shock. When he returned to the living room, Kyla was sitting quietly, her hands folded in her lap, gazing out the window like she'd never seen trees before. Maybe she hadn't He handed her the glass. So, how long are we talking about here? I mean, how long until your people come looking for you? Kyla took the water, sipping delicately before answering. It is difficult to say. The authorities from my world will notice my absence soon, but it may take time before they locate me. Earth is out of the way, so to speak, on the galactic scale. Jack slumped into his recliner, rubbing his temples. Great. So, just waiting for some intergalactic bounty hunters to show up on my lawn? Kyla chuckled softly, a melodic sound that felt strange in his small house. They are not bounty hunters, Jack Larson. More like enforcers of societal expectations. I was expected to follow a specific path, one that I could not accept. My people have very rigid views on roles, especially for someone of my rank. Your rank? Jack raised an eyebrow. What are you, some kind of alien royalty? Not royalty, but I was born into a high-status family, destined to fulfill certain obligations. She glanced down, her expression unreadable. My fate was to become a wife, but not in the way you understand it. My role would have been one of complete subservience, without choice or freedom. I couldn't live like that. Jack nodded slowly, trying to process everything. The more Kyla spoke, the more real it all felt, and he could sense the weight of her words. He'd felt trapped in his own life for years, but what she described was something far worse. So you ran, Jack said quietly. Yes, Kyla said, her voice soft. I fled to find a place where I could make my own choices, live on my terms. Earth seemed far enough. Jack shifted in his chair. But you said you needed to marry a human to stay. Why that? Why does marriage even matter to your people? Kyla's gaze met his, her opal eyes glowing faintly. In our culture, a formal union is a binding contract that provides certain legal protections. By marrying a human, I would be granted the right to remain here, safe from being returned to my home world against my will. Without it, I am vulnerable. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken tension. Jack could see the desperation in her eyes. This wasn't just some strange alien proposition. It was life or death for her. But it was a lot to ask. Marrying an alien? Jack could barely get a relationship with another human to work, and now this? I don't know, Kyla. I get what you're saying, but this is a big deal. We don't even know each other. Kyla looked down, the faintest flicker of sadness passing across her features. I understand. I would not ask if I had another option. All I seek is the chance to stay free. I do not wish to bind you in any way beyond the contract itself. Jack leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. So, it's just on paper? You're not asking for some romantic thing, right? No, Kyla said softly. Only the legal union. Nothing more. Jack let out a long breath. He couldn't believe he was even considering it, but there was something in her story, something in her, that made him feel like maybe this was his chance, too. He'd spent so long letting life pass him by, resigned to the loneliness of small-town routines. Maybe helping Kyla was the shake-up he needed. All right, Jack said finally, his voice low. I'll help you. We'll figure this out. Kyla's face lit up with a radiant smile, her eyes glowing with gratitude. Thank you, Jack Larson. You have no idea what this means to me. Jack stood up, rubbing the back of his neck awkwardly. Yeah, well, let's just take it slow, all right? We'll need to figure out how to do this without attracting attention. Of course, Kyla said, rising gracefully to her feet. She stepped closer to him, her eyes searching his for a moment. You are more generous than you realize, Jack Larson. He felt a warmth spread through him at her words, though he quickly brushed it off. Let's just hope I don't end up regretting it. Kyla's smile lingered as she looked out the window again. I will do my best to ensure you don't. Jack wasn't sure what he'd just gotten himself into, but for the first time in years, he felt like he was moving forward. He just hoped they could keep the whole alien wife thing under wraps long enough to figure it all out. That night, Jack lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. His house was small, just a couple of rooms, and he could hear Kyla moving quietly around in the guest room. The faint sound of her footsteps on the creaky wooden floor made everything feel more surreal. She was really here, under his roof, sleeping in his spare room. An alien, blue-skinned, silver-eyed, and completely out of this world, was just down the hall. He shifted under the covers, trying to make sense of it all. His life had been so predictable before. Same routine, day after day, working at Pete's shop, microwaving frozen dinners, going to bed too late after watching reruns of shows he didn't even care about. He never imagined something like this would happen. Who would? Jack turned onto his side, feeling the weight of the situation settle on his chest. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew his life had already changed. The next morning, Jack woke to the smell of something cooking. For a second, he thought he was dreaming. No one had ever cooked for him in the morning. Not since Sarah. He sat up, rubbing his eyes and listening to the soft clatter of dishes in the kitchen. It felt strange, waking up to the sound of someone else in his house. Part of him wanted to ignore it, to pull the covers back over his head and pretend his life hadn't taken this bizarre turn. But curiosity got the better of him. When he walked into the kitchen, he stopped in his tracks. Kyla was standing by the stove, dressed in one of his flannel shirts. It looked impossibly large on her slender frame, almost like a dress, her white hair tied back into a loose braid. She turned and smiled when she saw him. "Good morning, Jack Larson," she said, her voice soft and melodic. "I hope you don't mind, but I found some ingredients in your kitchen and attempted to prepare breakfast." Jack blinked, glancing at the stove. Scrambled eggs, toast, coffee. It wasn't much, but it was more than he'd done for himself in years. "You cooked?" Jack asked, still trying to wrap his head around the fact that an alien was making him breakfast. Kyla nodded. "I studied your human food practices during my observations. I wanted to express my gratitude for your hospitality." Jack scratched the back of his neck, feeling awkward. "You didn't have to do that. I mean, you're my guest. I'm the one who should be." "I wanted to," Kyla interrupted gently. "You have been kind to me when you had no reason to be. It is the least I can do." Jack felt something stir inside him, an emotion he hadn't felt in a long time. Gratitude. Maybe even something close to hope. He walked over to the table and sat down, eyeing the food she had prepared. The eggs looked a little off, but the effort was more than enough. He grabbed his fork and took a bite. It wasn't bad. Maybe a little bland, but edible. He looked up at Kyla, who was watching him carefully, as if trying to gauge his reaction. "It's good," he said, giving her a small smile. "Thanks." Kyla's face lit up with a smile of her own, one that made her eyes shimmer in the morning light. She sat down across from him, her hands folded neatly in her lap, as if she were waiting for something. Jack took another bite, the silence between them stretching out. He wasn't used to this, having someone around, someone who seemed to care. It made him feel uneasy, like he didn't know how to act anymore. But he couldn't deny that it also felt nice. "So," Jack said after a moment, breaking the quiet, "what's the plan now? How do we, go about this whole marriage thing?" Kyla tilted her head, her eyes thoughtful. "From my understanding, human unions require certain formalities. A legal process, correct?" Jack nodded, setting down his fork. "Yeah, there's paperwork. We'd need to get a marriage license, have a ceremony, though it doesn't have to be anything big, and then sign some documents." Kyla seemed to consider this, her fingers lightly drumming on the table. "I see. I am unfamiliar with your legal processes, but I trust you to guide me through it." Jack let out a small laugh. "Trust me, I barely know what I'm doing either. But we'll figure it out." She smiled again, a soft expression that made Jack feel something warm spread through his chest. He had no idea how long she could stay before her people came looking for her, but he was starting to feel the weight of that responsibility. It wasn't just about her staying hidden, it was about her freedom, her future. "Do you think they'll come after you soon?" Jack asked, his voice quieter now, more serious. Kyla's smile faded slightly, and she lowered her gaze. "It is hard to say. I fled in secret, but my absence will be noticed eventually. My people are persistent. They do not tolerate those who abandon their roles." Jack swallowed hard. "So, what happens if they find you?" Kyla hesitated for a moment, her expression tightening. "If they find me, I will be forced to return. And my fate will not be mine to decide." The weight of her words hung between them like a storm cloud, and Jack felt a knot form in his stomach. He didn't fully understand the politics of her world, but he didn't need to. He knew what it was like to feel trapped in a life you didn't choose. He couldn't let that happen to her. "We'll make sure they don't find you," Jack said, his voice firm. "I'll do whatever it takes to help." Kyla looked up at him, her eyes softening. "You are kind, Jack Larson. I am grateful for your willingness to help me, even though it is not your responsibility." Jack shifted in his seat, feeling a little uncomfortable under her gaze. "Yeah, well, I know what it's like to want out of something. Besides, I could use the company." Kyla's smile returned, warmer this time. "As could I." For the first time in a long while, Jack felt like he wasn't just going through the motions. There was purpose in what he was doing. And maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as alone as he thought. As they finished breakfast, Jack glanced out the window, his thoughts racing ahead. They had to keep things under wraps. Millbrook was a small town, and people loved to gossip. If anyone caught wind of this, of Kyla, things could spiral out of control. He had to figure out how to explain her, how to keep her presence a secret until they could work things out. But for now, he just focused on the moment. On the strange blue-skinned woman sitting across from him. His unexpected guest. His soon-to-be wife. "All right," Jack said, pushing his chair back. "First things first. Let's get you some clothes that aren't mine." Kyla blinked, then looked down at the oversized flannel shirt she was wearing. Yes. That would be appreciated." Jack chuckled. "Let's head into town later and see what we can find. I think there's a thrift store on Main Street. They won't ask too many questions." Kyla nodded, her smile returning. "I will follow your lead." As Jack stood up and cleared the plates from the table, he couldn't help but feel a sense of strange excitement bubbling under his skin. Life, for the first time in years, was unpredictable again. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what he needed. The morning slipped into afternoon, and Jack found himself pacing the small living room as he tried to plan their trip to the thrift store. Kyla was still in the kitchen, cleaning up the remnants of breakfast, her presence a constant reminder that everything was different now. His mundane routine had shattered like glass, replaced by the thrill and uncertainty of the unknown. "Okay, Kyla," he called, trying to sound casual. "What kind of clothes do you like? We need to find you something that fits in around here." Kyla emerged from the kitchen, her blue skin glistening softly in the light that streamed through the window. "I am unfamiliar with your earth fashion, Jack. My attire has always been chosen for me based on societal expectations. However, I have observed that humans wear a variety of fabrics and colors." Jack rubbed the back of his neck, chuckling softly. "Yeah, that's kind of the point. You can pick whatever you want. Just something that won't make people do a double take, you know?" Kyla tilted her head, her large, opalescent eyes studying him. "I see. I shall endeavor to choose something that reflects my individuality while remaining inconspicuous." "Perfect. Let's aim for that," Jack said, feeling a mixture of amusement and admiration for her earnestness. "We can leave in a bit. I just need to grab my keys and some cash." While he gathered his things, Jack couldn't help but steal glances at Kyla. The way she moved around his home, the fluid gracefulness of her actions, made it feel like he was living in a dream. She was from another world, yet she seemed to carry a certain humanity that he found comforting. After a few minutes, they were finally ready to head out. Jack opened the door, letting the fresh autumn air sweep into the house. "After you, Kyla," he said, gesturing for her to step outside first. She took a moment, as if absorbing the sights and sounds of his neighborhood. "It is quite different from what I am accustomed to," she remarked, stepping out onto the porch. "The colors are vivid and the atmosphere feels alive." "Welcome to Millbrook," Jack replied with a grin. "It's not much, but it has its charm." They climbed into Jack's old Chevy, the truck creaking as he turned the key in the ignition. The engine sputtered but eventually roared to life, and they set off down the bumpy road toward town. The ride was filled with an unusual energy. Kyla sat quietly in the passenger seat, her fingers lightly tracing the contours of the dashboard, as if she were studying an alien artifact. Jack stole a glance at her as he drove, noting how the sunlight played off her skin, making her appear almost ethereal. "So, what do you think? What's it like being on Earth?" he asked, trying to break the silence. "It is both fascinating and bewildering," Kyla replied, her voice thoughtful. "The air is different, the flora abundant and diverse. But the customs and interactions among humans, they are perplexing. Your species seems to be driven by emotions I am still learning to understand. Jack chuckled. You mean like love, anger, joy, and all that good stuff? Yes. It is a beautiful complexity, she said, her gaze drifting out the window. And yet, it can also lead to suffering. Yeah, it can, Jack agreed, a hint of melancholy creeping into his tone. But it's worth it, I think. Even with the pain. It makes the good moments feel special. They drove on in comfortable silence until they reached the thrift store. Jack parked the truck, and they stepped inside. The scent of old books and vintage clothing hit them as they entered. Racks of clothes hung from the ceiling, and the walls were lined with eclectic decorations. It was a treasure trove of forgotten items, each with its own history. Wow, Kyla said, her eyes widening as she took in the store. It is a veritable museum of human culture. Jack chuckled, feeling a sense of pride. Yeah, it's a bit of a dump, but you can find some real gems here. Kyla walked cautiously through the aisles, her fingers brushing over the fabrics as if she were feeling the pulse of the items. This is unlike any market I have seen. There is so much variety. Let's find you something, Jack said, grinning. You can start by checking out that rack over there. Kyla wandered off, diving into the clothes with an enthusiasm that made Jack smile. As she sifted through the hangers, he felt a strange sense of normalcy returning to his life. This was just two people shopping for clothes, something mundane, something ordinary. Yet, everything was still so extraordinary. A few minutes later, Kyla returned with an armful of clothes. I have selected a few items I believe might suit me, she said, her expression earnest. Jack looked at the assortment. There were sundresses, a couple of t-shirts, and a pair of jeans that looked like they could fit her. Let's try them on, he suggested, gesturing to the fitting rooms. As Kyla stepped into the fitting room, Jack leaned against the wall, his mind racing. How did he end up in this situation? A week ago, he was just a mechanic, living a quiet, mundane life. Now he was helping an alien woman shop for clothes in a thrift store. It felt like the plot of a bad science fiction movie, but it was also thrilling. When Kyla emerged, Jack was speechless. She wore a flowing sundress in a bright shade of turquoise that accentuated her blue skin beautifully. It was the perfect blend of alien and human, and it made her look radiant. How do I appear? She asked, twirling slightly. Absolutely stunning, Jack replied, unable to hide his smile. That dress is perfect for you. Kyla beamed, the joy in her expression evident. Thank you, Jack. I feel different, but in a good way. Let's get it, Jack said, feeling a sense of accomplishment. And maybe a couple more pieces while we're at it. They spent the next hour trying on clothes, Kyla giggling as she modeled various outfits, each one more vibrant and whimsical than the last. The laughter and lightness filled the store, drawing a few curious glances from the other shoppers. Who would have thought you'd be a fashionista? Jack teased, watching her parade in a particularly colorful shirt. Kyla laughed, her eyes sparkling. Fashion is an intriguing form of self-expression. I never realized how much I missed having choices. Eventually, they made their purchases and stepped back into the crisp autumn air, bags in hand. Jack felt lighter, as if a weight he hadn't realized he was carrying had been lifted. They walked side by side, their footsteps crunching on the gravel, an easy camaraderie developing between them. What's next? Kyla asked, looking up at him with that hopeful expression he had come to appreciate. I guess we should head back home, Jack replied. But first, what do you think about grabbing some lunch? There's a diner just down the road. Food. Yes, I would like to experience more of your culinary culture, she said, her enthusiasm infectious. The diner was a small, cozy place with red vinyl booths and checkered floors. They settled into a booth near the window, and Kyla looked around with wide-eyed wonder as the waitress approached. Hey there, what can I get you? The waitress asked, eyeing Kyla with a mix of curiosity and confusion. 2 burgers and fries, please, Jack said, flashing the waitress a smile. And a chocolate shake. And for you. The waitress turned to Kyla. Kyla hesitated for a moment. I will have the same, but with no meat. Is that an option? Sure thing. We can make you a veggie burger, the waitress said, jotting down their orders. And for drinks? Water is sufficient, Kyla replied with a nod. As they waited for their food, Kyla leaned across the table. This is a delightful experience, Jack. I feel free. Good, Jack said, his heart swelling a little. You deserve that. She smiled at him, and in that moment, everything felt right. It was strange, perhaps even absurd, but there was a sense of connection blossoming between them. They were two beings from vastly different worlds, yet they were finding common ground in the simplest of things: a meal, laughter, and shared moments. When their food arrived, Kyla's eyes widened in excitement. She watched intently as Jack took a big bite of his burger, savoring the flavor. "What does it taste like?" "Here, try it," Jack said, cutting off a piece and offering it to her. She took the bite cautiously, chewing thoughtfully. "Interesting," she said, her brows furrowing. "There is a blend of flavors. Spicy and savory. It is unlike anything I have encountered before." Jack laughed. "It's just a burger, but I'm glad you like it." As they ate, the conversation flowed naturally. They talked about their lives, Kyla sharing stories of her home world and Jack opening up about his past, about Sarah, about his dreams that had slowly faded over time. It felt liberating, as if he were shedding years of burdens with each word spoken. "Jack," Kyla said softly, her tone serious, "thank you for accepting me and for this experience. I know this is not conventional, and I cannot fathom the challenges it may bring you." "Don't thank me yet," Jack said, his smile faltering. "We've still got a long way to go. I just hope I can protect you. I won't let anything happen to you." Kyla looked deeply into his eyes, a quiet understanding passing between them. "You are courageous, Jack Larson. More than you realize." After lunch, they returned to the truck, the weight of the world outside feeling a little lighter. Jack couldn't shake the sense that they were on the precipice of something monumental. They were forging a partnership that transcended boundaries, an unexpected alliance born out of necessity but growing into something deeper. As they drove back home, the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Kyla turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "Do you believe in fate, Jack?" she asked. "Fate?" Jack repeated, his brow furrowing. "I don't know. I guess I've never thought about it much. Life just happens, you know?" Kyla nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "In my culture, we believe that the universe sometimes guides us towards certain paths. This meeting, it feels significant." "Maybe it is," Jack said, his heart racing. "Maybe this is all part of something bigger." As they pulled into the driveway, Jack felt a surge of hope wash over him. Whatever the future held, he knew one thing for certain: they were in this together. And for the first time in a long while, that thought didn't frighten him. It invigorated him. "Let's figure this out, step by step," he said as they got out of the truck. "One day at a time." Kyla smiled, her expression brightening the encroaching twilight. "I look forward to it, Jack Larson. Together, we shall navigate this journey." Hand in hand, they stepped into the unknown, ready to face whatever challenges awaited them. The following morning dawned bright and crisp, sunlight filtering through the worn curtains of Jack's modest home. He awoke to the sound of soft humming drifting from the kitchen, a melody unfamiliar yet oddly comforting. As he rubbed the sleep from his eyes, he recalled the events of the previous day: the thrift store, the diner, the budding connection with Kyla. He felt a rush of warmth at the thought, like the early rays of sunlight breaking through the chill of dawn. Stretching and yawning, Jack stumbled out of bed and made his way to the kitchen. The sight that greeted him made him pause. Kyla stood at the stove, her blue skin glowing in the morning light, expertly flipping pancakes. The aroma of sweet batter filled the air, mingling with the scent of coffee brewing nearby. "Good morning, Jack," she called, glancing over her shoulder with a bright smile. "I hope you enjoy breakfast. I am attempting to recreate what I observed in the diner." Jack chuckled, leaning against the doorframe. "You're a natural. That smells amazing. Pancakes for breakfast? You really went all out." "I wish to express my gratitude," Kyla replied, turning back to her cooking. "Your kindness has been enlightening. I wanted to contribute to our shared experience." Moved by her thoughtfulness, Jack crossed the kitchen and poured himself a cup of coffee. "You don't need to thank me, Kyla. I'm just glad you're here. I never expected any of this, you know? My life was so ordinary before." As the pancakes piled high on a plate, Kyla glanced at him. "Ordinary can be comforting, but it can also lead to stagnation. I am learning that unexpected changes can bring joy." Jack smiled, the tension in his chest easing slightly. "You're not wrong there. A week ago, I was just a guy fixing cars. Now, I have an alien house guest cooking breakfast in my kitchen." They shared a laugh, and Jack felt a sense of camaraderie blossoming. Breakfast was simple yet delightful, each bite filled with warmth and the sweetness of newfound friendship. As they sat across from each other at the small kitchen table, he couldn't help but admire how Kyla had embraced the mundanity of his life with such enthusiasm. "Kyla," Jack said, putting down his fork, "do you have any plans for today? I mean, besides learning how to make more Earth food?" "I would like to explore more of your world," she replied, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. "Yesterday was enlightening, but there is so much I wish to see and understand." Jack considered her request, a smile creeping onto his face. "How about a trip to the local park? It's beautiful this time of year, and there's a small lake. We can pack a picnic and enjoy the day outside. An excursion to the park sounds wonderful." Kyla beamed. "I shall prepare a meal to take with us." "Great. Let's make it a picnic to remember," Jack replied, feeling excitement bubble within him. The thought of spending the day together, away from the confines of the house, lifted his spirits. After breakfast, they set about packing for their outing. Jack grabbed a couple of blankets and a cooler while Kyla busied herself preparing a selection of snacks. She filled containers with fruits, veggies, and some of the pancakes she had made earlier. Watching her move with purpose and grace reminded Jack just how unique she was. "Here," Kyla said, handing him a container filled with vibrant fruits. "I have made this. It is an assortment of earth fruits, apples, strawberries, and grapes. I have never tasted them before, but they appear to be delightful." "Let me tell you, you picked a winner," Jack replied, taking the container from her. "You're going to love them. They're sweet and refreshing." With their picnic packed, they set out for the park, the late morning sun warming the air. As they drove through town, Jack pointed out various landmarks, the old library, the town square, and the local high school, each evoking memories of his own life. "Why is that building so grand?" Kyla asked, her gaze fixed on the towering structure of the library. "That's the library. It's a place where people can borrow books, learn, and find knowledge," Jack explained. "It's one of the oldest buildings in town." "Knowledge is essential," Kyla mused. "In my culture, we revere it. The pursuit of understanding is what drives progress." "Yeah, I get that." "Knowledge is powerful," Jack replied, feeling a spark of admiration for her perspective. When they arrived at the park, Jack found a spot under a sprawling oak tree, its leaves rustling gently in the breeze. He laid out the blanket, and Kyla placed the cooler beside it, her eyes scanning the serene surroundings. "It is beautiful here," she said, taking a deep breath. "The colors of nature are vibrant and alive." Jack watched as she took in the sights, her appreciation for the world around her palpable. "It's one of my favorite places to unwind. Nature has a way of putting things into perspective." Kyla settled down on the blanket, her expression reflecting contentment. "I feel free here, away from the expectations of my former life." Jack nodded, feeling a connection growing between them. "And you should feel free, Kyla. You deserve to explore this world on your terms." They unpacked the food, spreading out the colorful array of fruits and pancakes. As they ate, the conversation flowed easily, filled with laughter and stories. Kyla shared tales of her home world, how it operated, its customs, and the rigid societal structures that had confined her. "It is hard to explain," Kyla said, her voice thoughtful. "On my planet, we are assigned roles at birth, predetermined by our genetics and societal status. I was to be a perfect mate, molded to serve, to please." "That sounds rough," Jack said, his brow furrowing. "No freedom to choose who you want to be." "Precisely," Kyla replied, her expression somber. "I longed for more, for the freedom to explore my identity. When I fled, I did so in search of autonomy, of a life without constraints." Jack felt a pang of empathy. "You're brave, Kyla. It takes a lot to break free from something like that. Most people wouldn't even consider it." She smiled softly, her expression warming. "Your encouragement means much to me. Perhaps I can learn from your experiences as well." Their conversation turned lighter as they shared stories from their respective worlds, Jack recounting the oddities of small-town life, and Kyla revealing her unique perceptions of Earth's customs. The afternoon slipped away, the sun casting golden rays that danced between the branches above them. After lunch, they decided to take a stroll around the park, Kyla absorbing every detail, the flowers blooming in riotous colors, children laughing and playing, couples walking hand in hand. Jack watched her with admiration, her curiosity reminding him of the simple joys he often overlooked. "Look at that!" Kyla exclaimed, pointing to a small group of people gathered around a fountain. "What are they doing?" "Looks like they're feeding the ducks," Jack said, chuckling. "It's a local tradition. People come to the park to relax and enjoy nature. Feeding the ducks is just a fun way to pass the time." "Can we join them?" Kyla asked, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Sure. Let's grab some bread from the cooler." Jack rummaged through their picnic supplies and found a half-eaten loaf. They made their way to the fountain, where the ducks quacked excitedly as people tossed pieces of bread into the water. "Here, let me show you," Jack said, demonstrating how to throw the bread. Kyla watched intently, mimicking his motion, her face lighting up as the ducks swarmed the floating morsels. "This is delightful," she laughed, her melodic voice rising above the chatter of the park. "I have never interacted with creatures like this before." "Ducks can be pretty entertaining," Jack replied, laughing as one duck quacked loudly, almost as if demanding more food. "And they're surprisingly bold." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Jack felt an overwhelming sense of peace settle over him. He glanced at Kyla, her face illuminated by the fading light, and felt a warmth spreading through him. "Kyla," he said, his voice softer now. "I know this might sound a bit crazy, but I feel like I've known you forever. It's like you've opened my eyes to so much more than I ever realized." Kyla turned to him, her expression sincere. "You are not alone in this feeling, Jack. I sense a bond between us that transcends our differences. It is comforting." "Yeah, comforting," he echoed, his heart racing. "I never expected to connect with someone like this, especially not an alien." They shared a moment of silence, the sounds of the park fading into the background. Jack felt the weight of his past lifting, replaced by the promise of new beginnings. With each passing moment, he realized that Kyla was not just a visitor in his life, she was becoming an integral part of it. As the sky darkened, they returned to their blanket, watching the stars emerge one by one. "Look," Kyla said, pointing to the night sky. "They are beautiful. Do you often gaze upon them?" "Yeah, I do," Jack said, feeling a sense of wonder wash over him. "There's something magical about the stars, you know? They remind us that there's so much more out there." Kyla nodded, her eyes reflecting the twinkling lights above. "And so much more to discover together." Jack smiled, feeling a surge of hope and determination. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew they would face them together. In that moment, under the starlit sky, he realized that life's unpredictability could lead to the most extraordinary journeys. "Together," he affirmed, his heart full. "We'll figure this out. One day at a time." The days turned into weeks, and with each sunrise, the bond between Jack and Kyla deepened. Their lives began to intertwine like the roots of the towering trees in the park they had come to love. Each moment spent together felt like a step toward a shared future, filled with laughter, discovery, and an understanding that transcended their differences. Kyla embraced the human experience with an eagerness that often left Jack in awe. She learned to cook new dishes, delighted in the taste of chocolate, and even picked up quirky phrases that made him chuckle. On weekends, they explored local attractions, visited farmers markets, and enjoyed lazy afternoons watching movies, her wide eyes taking in the absurdities of human storytelling. But beneath the warmth of their growing relationship lay an undercurrent of uncertainty. Kyla often gazed at the sky with a distant look, her thoughts seemingly drifting far away. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that her past was still haunting her, an unseen specter lurking at the edges of their happiness. One evening, as they prepared dinner together, Jack decided it was time to address the unspoken fears. "Kyla," he began, his voice steady yet gentle, "we need to talk about what happens next. I know you came here to escape, to be free. But we can't ignore the fact that there are still people looking for you." Kyla paused, her hands stilling as she placed the vegetables on the cutting board. "I have tried to focus on the present, Jack. But I know my past is not so easily forgotten." Jack took a deep breath, moving closer to her. "You're not alone in this. We're a team, right? Whatever happens, we'll face it together." She looked up at him, her large, opalescent eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and concern. "Your support means everything to me. But I worry that my presence might put you in danger." "I can handle danger," he replied firmly. But I can't handle the thought of losing you. If we need to find a way to ensure your safety, we'll do it together. You deserve to be free, Kyla. After a long silence, she nodded, her expression softening. You are right. I cannot allow fear to dictate my choices. I have spent too long being afraid. Then let's come up with a plan, Jack suggested, his heart pounding with resolve. Maybe we can figure out how to deal with the authorities on your home world. There must be a way for you to stay here legally, or at least to protect yourself. Kyla smiled, a flicker of hope igniting in her eyes. I would like that. If we could find a way for me to remain with you, I would be grateful beyond measure. Over the next few days, they delved into research, trying to understand the complexities of intergalactic law. Kyla shared what she knew about her home world's customs and regulations. They worked late into the night, poring over books and articles, brainstorming strategies to navigate her situation. One afternoon, they discovered a loophole in intergalactic marriage laws that could provide Kyla with legal protection on Earth. If they were to formalize their relationship through marriage, she could secure her place in Jack's world. Marriage? Jack echoed, his heart racing. You mean, actually getting married? Kyla nodded, her expression earnest. Yes. In my culture, marriage is not merely a union of love, but also a partnership that offers safety and stability. It would protect me from being hunted by my people. Jack's mind raced, the weight of her words settling on his shoulders. But marriage is a big deal. It's not something to take lightly. I understand that, she replied, stepping closer. But this would not just be for my sake. I have grown to care for you deeply, Jack Larson. This partnership could benefit us both. Jack felt a warmth wash over him at her confession. I care about you too, Kyla. More than I ever thought possible. But what if this doesn't work out? What if we rush into something and regret it? Kyla placed a hand on his arm, her touch grounding him. Life is unpredictable, but I believe that love is worth the risk. Together, we have created something beautiful, something worth protecting. He looked into her eyes, the sincerity of her words resonating within him. The memories of their time together flooded back, the laughter, the adventures, the quiet moments shared under the stars. He felt an overwhelming sense of rightness in her presence, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. Okay, Jack said finally, his voice steady. Let's do it. Let's get married. A radiant smile broke across Kyla's face, illuminating her features. Really? You would choose to marry me? I would, he affirmed, a sense of excitement building inside him. We'll figure out the details, but I want you in my life. I want to protect you, and I want to share my world with you. Over the next few weeks, they made plans for their wedding, embracing the joy and chaos of preparing for a union that was as unconventional as it was profound. Friends and family were surprised but supportive, accepting Kyla with open arms, drawn in by her charm and warmth. On the day of their wedding, Jack stood nervously at the altar, the sun streaming through the trees, casting a golden hue over the gathered guests. He couldn't believe how far they had come, how two souls from different worlds had found each other and forged a bond that defied all odds. As Kyla walked down the aisle, a vision of grace in her shimmering dress, Jack's heart soared. She looked stunning, her blue skin glowing against the backdrop of nature. The moment their eyes met, he knew that he had made the right choice. I, Jack Larson, take you, Kyla, to be my wife, he spoke, his voice steady as he looked into her eyes. Together, we will face whatever comes our way. I, Kyla, take you, Jack Larson, to be my husband, she replied, her voice filled with emotion. In this world and beyond, I will stand by your side. With those words, they sealed their vows with a kiss, the sound of applause and cheers ringing in their ears. In that moment, they felt the weight of the universe lift, replaced by the promise of a new beginning. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over their gathering, Jack and Kyla stood hand in hand, ready to embrace whatever challenges lay ahead. Together, they had woven a tapestry of love and hope, transcending boundaries and defying expectations. In the days that followed, they faced the complexities of intergalactic law with determination and courage. With their marriage recognized, Kyla found the protection she needed. The weight of the world began to lift, and together they charted a course for a future filled with endless possibilities. I never imagined life could be this beautiful, Jack said one evening as they stargazed in the backyard. With you, I feel alive. Kyla rested her head on his shoulder, her presence soothing him. The universe has a way of guiding us, does it not? Jack smiled, glancing at the stars twinkling above. Yeah, it sure does. And I'm grateful for every twist and turn that led me to you. Hand in hand, they embraced the unknown, ready to explore the adventures that awaited them. With each passing day, they created their own story, one that blended worlds, shattered expectations, and blossomed in love. In the end, it didn't matter where they came from. What mattered was where they were headed, together, united, and unstoppable.